Hello, everyone. Welcome to the Carolinas Weather Group. You are watching the January 27th edition of our show, the last Wednesday in January. Hard to believe that we've already zoomed through this month and we're approaching February. Everybody in the Carolinas and the Southeast, that is, went through their first winter storm this past week, and we'll kind of talk about that towards the end of the show. We can't go on this show without talking about that because it was a very memorable one, especially for the North Carolina mountains and over towards Raleigh. They've seen a lot of icing over there, so we'll definitely talk on that. But before we do that, we're going to kind of talk about what it takes to become a meteorologist. You know, if you're starting off young and as you go through middle and elementary school and then up in the high school and college. Our guest tonight is Frank Strait. He is a meteorologist at AccuWeather.com, or AccuWeather, at AccuWeather.com is the website. Now, he's going to kind of talk to us about what people need to do if they kids are interested in the career. Maybe you've had one career and you want to switch careers, another outlet that you can go through and get your degree. So Frank's going to be on tonight to talk to us a little bit about that. We're also going to recap the winter weather event, maybe look into what we can expect in February. But before we do that, let's get a few housekeeping rules out of the way. This is a live broadcast. If you are wanting to ask any questions or comments, you can do that via our Facebook page or our Twitter page. I do have that up in another window, so I'll be monitoring that as well if we have any questions. And also, you can download this podcast on your favorite outlet, your Android store or Android Google Play, or your Apple Store, iTunes, that you can download the podcast. And I think that's about it. I do believe all of our podcasts are up to date, and we do want to thank all of those who joined us last week as we did our special show. Had over 1,000 viewers for the snow event last week with Eric Thomas and Gary Stevenson and Grant Gilmore and Patrick Ellis. So we appreciate you guys joining that and sharing that video and getting the word out about what we do here. So. Guys, I'll briefly throw it around to you panelists and kind of talk about the weather that we've had. We'll kind of hit on the winter storm towards the end of the show, but I know the great melting has happened all throughout the Carolinas, so I'm going to toss it down to Kit, who is at UNC Charlotte tonight. Kit?
Thanks, Scotty. Well, like you said, the great meltdown has begun and has almost completed. Fun story, when the snow actually came through, that morning, I went outside at like 4 a.m. did a little Twitter video and was playing in the snow. But because I was up until past 4 a.m., I slept until past 11, and my roommates all went outside to go play in the snow, and they tried to throw snow at the window, but he doesn't have a good arm, so he missed it each time. But you can still see the footprints out in the lawn right in front of the window. Those like the only spots where there is still snow right now, but there's a few piles. It's all that dirty snow with all the junk piled up on it right now. So it's the magic has gone from UNC Charlotte, and we're back to normal grounds. I'll throw it over back to Scotty.
Yeah, thanks, Kit. I was actually looking. We're going up against Weather Brains tonight, so no pressure, Frank. No pressure. They just said who's going to win the YouTube ratings war. So
I'm doing my best James Brand impersonation.
That's right. No pressure tonight. So, James, you are there in the Pineville area. I know you guys had the great meltdown a few days ago. How's everything going today?
It's good. There's just very little ice and snow left. I think by the time we got around to the start of the work week, all that was left was kind of the little bits that were in the shadow. We had about an inch of what would probably be some combination of snow, ice, and sleet if you kind of wanted to dissect all of it in there. And I know we were talking before the show that at least from my perspective here on the south side of town, everything was kind of back to normal by the start of the work week. So I know at least the kids on the south side of town got a few extra bonus snow days for what really were just beautiful, sunny, 60-degree days.
That's something that surprised me is how it's warmed up, since that event. I mean, we went. I think in the Saturday was in the 30s, but by Sunday rolled around, we were back in the 50s and now 60s. So the great meltdown did not happen in Charleston because I don't think you really had much to melt in the first place, did you, Shay?
No, we got a little bit of rain, and we got some cool temperatures, just enough Saturday morning to get a few flurries. That went from Charleston down to Savannah, and actually it was kind of interesting how a couple of the models really nailed that one. But Yeah, the freezing column really made it down this way in the mid atmosphere, upper atmosphere, everything coordinated together to allow that to fall. So it went on for about 3 or 4 hours. So we got to see a few here, but it's warmed up since. We got one more little cold shot tomorrow with low pressure off of our coastline now, and another one from the Gulf transferring over probably tomorrow. And then that's going to be your next nor'easter for the northeast United States at least. But we're looking to get back into spring-like weather probably by the end of the weekend into early next week into the 70s. So yeah, going to enjoy that.
Break out the shorts down in Charleston. So I think we're going to get into the 60s this weekend as well. So the warm-up continues. So let's go over to our guest tonight, Mr. Frank Strait. He is the meteorologist at AccuWeather. And Frank, first-time guest to our show, so kind of introduce yourself to the people. Talk about how you got interested in weather and how your career has brought you to where you're at right now.
Okay. Well, I was born and raised in Rock Hill, South Carolina, which is just south of Charlotte, for those not familiar with the area. Lived there the first 20 years of my life. Then I kind of bounced around through the University of South Carolina system for a while and decided that being a meteorologist is what I wanted to do in the first place. But there was no meteorology school in South Carolina at the time. I don't think there still is. So ended up going to UNC Asheville, and that's where I got my degree from, and shortly thereafter took a job up here at AccuWeather. I've been here ever since. I think I got bit by the weather bug in about the 5th grade when we were exposed significantly to weather for the first time. And I just sort of went crazy after that, as a lot of people do. A lot of people who are afflicted with this weather syndrome that some folks might call it. Yeah, it happens at a young age for a lot of people, and it certainly did with me, being about 10 years old. But stayed passionate about it all through high school. That's what I really knew I wanted to do, but tried a couple of other things that didn't work out so well, but eventually did pursue weather and get my degree.
Well, you were talking about how the weather bug bit you at a young age. What was the cause of that? Many people have different storms or maybe different meteorologists that had influence on them. What was your story?
Well, I think there were several different storms that kind of played into that. I remember right about that same time as we were studying weather in 5th grade science class that we had a snowstorm, which was kind of a surprise storm at the time. This would be like 1982 for me, and we had it was I think the first week of March, and we expected it would be rain, or the forecasters at the time were calling for rain, but that morning as I was getting ready for school, went out to my mom and dad had to be at work very early, so they would drop me off at my grandmother's house, who would then take me to school. And as I was getting in the car, I noticed there was some snow mixed in with the rain. And by the time we got to my grandmother's house, it was all snow, and there was probably 2 inches on the ground by the time we had to be at school, but school still wasn't canceled. We were at school for maybe a couple of hours before the school district decided we should probably send kids home. By the time all was said and done that evening, there was 10 inches on the ground.
Wow. That's a pretty impressive event there.
Yeah, especially for being so late in the season, being that this was March we're talking about here. So yeah, it was a very impressive snowstorm to say the least, but that was only the beginning. There was that big severe weather outbreak in I think '84 in South Carolina. Inspired me a lot too. There was a tornado about I guess 50 miles south of Rock Hill that day in Winnsboro that basically tore the town to shreds. If I recall correctly, that was an EF3 or 4, or well, F3 or 4. The EF scale wasn't in effect back then, but still, that was a pretty amazing severe weather outbreak. And then, of course, Hurricane Hugo in '89. I was a junior in high school then, so that was an amazing thing to say the least. To be woke up by the wind at about 4 a.m. and winds gusting to probably 80 miles an hour. And, I'm at my grandparents' house that day, and the wind's shaking this house that was built right after World War II. My grandfather was scared to death, had us moved into a room they added in the 1960s, because they figured it would be a little sturdier because it was 15 or 20 years newer than the other construction in the house. But yeah, it was just pretty wild looking outside, seeing all the big trees getting blown down, green flashes of what I first thought was lightning, but then later realized were probably transformers going all around us. That was something else.
Well, you were talking about your time there in the Rock Hill area. Did you have any favorite on-air personality meteorologists in the Charlotte market that you kind of followed over some of the others?
Several, actually, and it kind of varied from time period to time period. I'm old enough to remember Clyde McLean on WBTV there back in the day, and it seems like everyone loved Clyde McLean. Also, I remember Jerry Peterson and his Thunder Boomers. He was fun to watch as well. And then in the later years, I think in the late '90s, Eric Thomas started at AccuWeather. I mean, not AccuWeather, but WBTV, and so I remember him as well. And you know, the list just keeps going. One of the things about the Charlotte market today is that you're really blessed to have a good group of good guys, and Steve Udelson and Brad Panovich and Eric Thomas, Al Conklin, all those guys, and the other guys at and women at the stations there too. They're all very sharp, and they're all very talented and very good on the air.
You're one, and James, you've been in the Charlotte meteorologist market. You may have heard this story, and Kit, you may have too. I don't know, but you mentioned Cloudy McLean, and I believe the story that I remember most from his time in Charlotte was he called for partly cloudy skies one day, and he told the kids there was no chance of snow for them to do their homework and their tests and stuff. And that morning they woke up to 8 inches of snow, and this guy called the station and told Cloudy McLean he had 8 inches of partly cloudy on his porch. So that is my Cloudy McLean story that I remember. I never got to see him on TV, but I've always heard that story.
Yeah, I remember that too. I remember him saying that on the air. I think he was funny.
Yeah, they
told me that story a couple of times.
Yeah, so that's always my favorite Cloudy McLean story to tell. So that's pretty cool. And Eric's still hanging in the Charlotte area too. He was with us last week, and he is actually the guy that got me started in weather. It wasn't a weather event, but it was actually Eric Thomas himself. So pretty cool side story there. So Frank, you went to UNCA. Kind of talk to us a little bit about that. Here's a good time to plug the school. I know it's a small school, but it's produced a lot of meteorologists.
Yeah, it sure has. We actually have another one here at AccuWeather, Jesse Farrell, who's our social media guru here and community outreach person. And so he graduated in '95. I graduated in '99, if I remember correctly. And we've had a couple of others here, too. So we certainly have turned out a number of meteorologists. I think like half the staff at the Wilmington Weather Service office is UNC Asheville graduates or something like that. So anyway, yeah, we have turned out a lot of meteorologists. Now, the program, I think, has changed in the 15 or so years since I graduated there. The professors, most of them have moved on. The only one that's still there now, I think, is Alex Wong, and he's a lot of fun too. But I don't know the other guys as well as I knew Dr. Heimbach, who's now retired up in Maine, I think, and Dr. Ed Brotak, who still lives in Western North Carolina, but he's retired as well. And, Fred Quinlan, the climatology guy. I'm not sure what's become of him, but anyway, the program is very solid. And back in the day when I was there, it was more geared to your operational meteorologists. But I think that's the main thing that's changed since I was there is that if you're more interested in research going into that track, I think UNCA is more supportive of that now than it was when I attended back then. It was mainly geared toward churning out weather service meteorologists, TV guys, and operational guys in the private sector.
Frank, that's a good segue actually into my question, because a lot of people, when they think meteorologist, they think National Weather Service, they think TV, but your company is a good example of just how diversified a meteorology field could be. Could you just walk people through who maybe aren't familiar with some of the different tracks that somebody could take either at your company or another company?
Right. Well, yeah. Here at AccuWeather, we serve a very wide range of clients here. I mean, everyone knows about the newspaper, television, and radio. A lot of y'all hear my voice on the radio in the Carolinas and well beyond, of course, several days a week. But we also have various companies that are clients that receive specialized type forecasts, like for their criteria might be for high winds, 50 miles an hour, or in some cases less, depending upon what their needs are. Some may need to be warned just for lightning. Some may need to be warned for any amount of snow, and so our the clients we serve are wide and varied. And of course, there's our AccuWeather Enterprise Services office over in Wichita, which handles most of the severe weather warnings nowadays. And if you're a severe weather guru and have a great interest in that, that's certainly a place where you might feel at home, because that's what you're doing, is you're issuing those just-in-time sort of warnings for clients for tornadoes, severe weather, and in some cases winter weather too.
And Frank, that's kind of interesting. You were talking about the different services that you provide. I took a little while to take a look over your site, and you realized that you have forensic meteorology as well, to go into courtrooms and represent clients and do diagrams, anything you can to support a case. Or how does all of that work with AccuWeather?
Yes, that's something I have only really haven't dabbled in very much myself, but we do have a forensic meteorology department, and basically what you said is what we do. We provide expert testimony in court cases, provide weather information for attorneys that are working in litigation, and stuff like that.
Have you ever done that yourself?
I haven't done that myself yet. There are 3 or 4 people that work in that department. Dr. Joe Sobel, who's been with the company forever, he's the main guy with that, I think.
So Frank, tell us how you ended up at AccuWeather, and then we'll kind of go into the schooling part of our discussion.
Well, to explain that, I think I would have to explain a few more personal details about my life. A lot of people, they go through the life cycle of they go to school, they get their degree, they start a family, then or they get a job, then they start a family. Well, with me, starting a family happened sometime in the middle of college, so that really complicates things when you want to be a meteorologist, because a lot of meteorologists they work rotating shifts or crazy hours or stuff like that. Well, it happened that as I graduated college, I was a single dad, so finding a job I thought was going to be impossible, and it actually nearly was. But AccuWeather decided to take a chance on me, and I'm glad they did, and I think they're glad they did, because they were able to give me the hours that I needed, most importantly, and forever grateful for that.
And Frank, your concentration up there at AccuWeather is on the southeast here in the Carolinas, where you were actually born. Is that correct?
I spend most of my time forecasting for the South, but not exclusively in any way. I'm on the radio in New York City, and out west in Chicago, and other places, Boston frequently too. So I'm kind of all over the place, but I think most of the work I do covers the southern states.
Awesome. Well, let's talk about meteorology and what your recommendations are and suggestions. If I know we have a lot of teachers and a lot of students, and actually students who are actually in college right now for meteorology degrees watching our show. Kind of talk to us about how young we start and the different avenues that you would suggest as people go through middle, high, and into college.
Okay. Well, I absolutely want to start with middle school and high school students, simply because so many of the people who become interested in meteorology take an interest and become passionate about it at a really young age. So we definitely want to start there. And I think first and foremost, when you're in middle school and high school, I think your job number one is to develop good study habits that will benefit you going forward, and not just through school and even through college, but also later in life too. You doing homework doesn't stop when you get your degree and you decide to enter the job market. It's important that you have the discipline and the good skills you need to actually keep learning, because you always want to get better. Continuous improvement is kind of the corporate buzzword there. So that's number one, but also you need to take school seriously, and not just your science classes and maybe your math classes too, because you know that's important, but also developing your communication skills are important. Take your English classes seriously. Take a public speaking class, a drama class. That's all helpful and will benefit you, because you need to be a good communicator, and that's true no matter which way you go with meteorology, with atmospheric sciences, whether you go on television or whether you're a radio guy or whether you go into something else, another branch of the public or private sector where you're briefing TV, or rather TV clients, yeah, maybe, but also the general public or DOT supervisors, things like that. You need to be able to relate the forecast to them effectively, and the potential pitfalls in the forecast too, where necessary. So those communication skills are vital, and that starts at a young age, if you can.
Now, when you got into forecasting, how did you build confidence in what you were discussing? So if some of these younger individuals are coming out of high school and going into college and they're taking meteorology classes and they want to get into forecasting, what sort of advice do you give to them to build their confidence levels?
Well, really, as we tell folks in the recruiting talks that we have at various universities, the way you get good at forecasting the weather is to forecast the weather. Now, when you're still in middle school and high school, your skill set's going to be very limited, because you don't have the technical background that someone with a degree or who is already in college will have. So your skills aren't going to be quite that of a pro meteorologist, but it still doesn't hurt to study, do some self-study of the weather and the models and how they behave, and what weather patterns produce what type of situation. So one of the great things about living in this day and age, an advantage that a young person has today that I didn't have when I was, say, 15, is that you can go on the internet and look up anything you want about the weather, it seems, anymore. When I was that age, you could go check out a book in the library and it might have a bunch of partial differential equations in it, and you're sitting there wondering what all these funny looking D's mean. But today, you can actually go online and study what you want to study and learn on your own, and that's a very powerful thing.
That's a good. Go ahead, Kit.
So, like you're talking about how all this information is out there, what would you say as far as models? Like, would you recommend getting used to looking at models, or would you save that until later?
I don't think that it's a bad thing to be looking at the models and looking at what they're outputting, and also learn what they mean, and try to learn how to interpret it. On the other hand, a lot of young folks I know have their Twitter or Facebook accounts, and they want to tweet something out and look like the pros, but don't go around being an authority. That makes life kind of difficult for us pros when we have to kind of clean up some of the messes that can be left by that. I don't want to discourage your passions at all, but on the other hand, you have to do it the right way. For one thing, don't hide who you are. Come out, put your name on your forecast, and say, hey, this is my work. I'm an enthusiast, not a pro met yet, but I want to be one. And that way the general public knows where the information's coming from. It's not, again, to say at all that even a young person can't put out good forecasts every now and then, but we have to be smart about it, including when you're young and you're an enthusiast at that age.
Yeah, that was actually going to be what I was going to ask you. With social media has really taken off in the past couple of years. Twitter, Facebook, Google Plus, all a way that people get their weather information now. My question is how much has social media changed your meteorology career when you started to where it is now? Because a lot of people, instead of turning on the TV or even honestly now going to a website, it's more looking at their Twitter, Facebook. How has that shaped from when you started it in middle high school into what you're doing today?
Yeah, well, it really has changed everything. I mean, when I started at AccuWeather here in 2000, there wasn't really any social media yet. That didn't. I mean, I think that Facebook was founded maybe around that time, but it wasn't open to the public until years later. MySpace, I think, was the first thing that came along, and I don't think anybody really knew how to effectively use social media. That was sort of like the practice ground there. But eventually along came Facebook and then Twitter too, and it's really powerful stuff. It has a lot of widespread uses, not just in terms of being able to try to relate weather information to the public, but also if you're a pro meteorologist, it kind of helps to enhance your situational awareness. When you're sitting there and you see someone tweeted, "Oh, the Weather Service just put out a PNS statement with a list of snowfall reports," and you can just click on it. There it is, instead of having to, go find your bookmark for it or whatever, or look it up in the terminal on your workstation. It allows you to do a lot of different things quickly that you couldn't do before. On the other hand, social media can be a kind of a time sink as well. You may find yourself spending a lot of time looking through social media for just to see what's going on, and it may hurt your time management if you're working on a operational schedule at a place like AccuWeather.
And James, I actually want to bring you in here because you had some stints at Fox Charlotte while in between meteorologist shifts from one to the other. You did the TV side of things, and you were doing the forecasts on TV. And how did that social media interaction with you and your followers there, how did that help out? And talk to us a little bit about that on the TV side. I mean, you were just there doing that just a couple months ago. Talk to us a little bit about how important it is for a meteorologist not only to see the audience seeing you do your work on TV, but also following you on social media.
I was just thinking about that when Frank was saying how social media can suck you in and be distracting, because I think it probably got the better of me one or two times. You were like, oh, hang on, let me just, and the next thing you know, you're 5 minutes to air. Yeah, Frank, just as a little background, I did a little, I was in a different department with the Fox station, but kind of did some freelancing and some fill-in with the weather department. So I dabbled in it a little bit there. And Scotty, to answer your question, you know, at the end of the day, and Frank, I'm going to ask you about this in a second, the weather is really a public service. So we were always doing that, whether we were on the air or on social media. But of course, anytime we took to social media, it gave us a chance to interact a little bit more personally, but also we didn't have the constraints of 2 minutes, 2.5 minutes. You got 3 minutes to do the weather, which is sometimes a struggle depending on what the show, the rest of the newscast looks like and how much time they allot you. But Frank, I actually wanted to ask you, you're talking a little bit about this, and I think this segues in nicely whether you're on air or on social media, but weather really is a public service. So how would you explain that to somebody who's maybe just getting into the field and how they should take that responsibility?
That's right. That's an important way to look at it. I'm glad you brought that up because, forecasting the weather and relating it to the public, it's one of the most critical things I think that anyone does, really, because the weather has such an impact on everyone's life in so many ways, especially when the weather's getting crazy. So, yeah, when you're definitely, it's definitely a public service. Of course, a lot of folks make a business out of it the way we do at AccuWeather, but it's a very important thing, and it's something you can't take lightly. So you have to be cognizant of what you're saying and the impact of what you are going to say or write or put on TV, whatever, will have on people. You don't want them to panic, but you may need them to prepare. So you do have to very, very carefully choose your words, and sometimes on the fly without much time to think about it.
And I think when we talk about weather, we're talking about all these different tools. We have the models, but then we also have colleagues and other agencies we work closely with, like the National Weather Service. Your company is an interesting setup too, where they do some licensing, some partnerships with local broadcasters. For instance, the station I was at, our 7-day forecast was branded AccuWeather. How does that really work in the greater setup with you guys when it comes to collaborating with other meteorologists out there? We actually have tried more, I think, here at AccuWeather to be
to collaborate and to go back and forth between us and the Weather Service in recent years here, and I think that's a good thing. And really, social media and things like NWS Chat have helped out a lot with that too, to allow us to be able to communicate with them and ask them questions on the fly, and I think that's really really helpful to help us get a better idea of what they're thinking, and allows us to express our thoughts sometimes too. But the collaboration also goes between us and our clients too. Like you said, we provide forecast information to various television stations, and every now and then we'll get a call from a TV meteorologist saying, a little concerned about what you have here for a particular point, and we have to kind of explain things, explain our point of view, so that at least he understands what we're talking about, and what and the reasoning why we're forecasting what we're forecasting, even if he or she might not agree with it.
You mentioned the National Weather Service chat, which is a great tool and really kind of does help share those ideas and really maybe help somebody think about something a certain way that they weren't thinking about it before. For students who maybe don't yet have the credentials to get into a tool just like that, are there any tools that you use in your everyday forecasting and operation that somebody just looking to expand their knowledge base or get their hands on something could use?
We've talked about NWS Chat and social media. I usually have a Twitter web interface window open or tab open at all the time, just so I can kind of monitor what's going on there. And when I have 15 seconds to spare, that's one of the nice things about Twitter. If you have 15 seconds, you can actually ingest a lot of information that way. But I'm also looking at the radar a lot. I have a copy of GR2 Analyst that I use a lot here. I also use BuffKit a lot as well to look at model output for a given point. You look at a sounding for a given point, you learn so much, or can diagnose the weather fairly quickly that way, and see how things evolve for a given spot that way. In terms of model data as well, I've also typically have one of our AccuWeather Pro Animator windows open, or maybe 2 or 3 of them, when I'm trying to look at GFS, the Euro, maybe the NAM, and other models too. Of course, you have to keep in mind to make sure those models are verifying. So you're looking at current weather as well. I have the SPC mesoanalysis page open as well. I know that's not really an observation, but it's a close approximation to one, I think, and kind of gives you a good graphical representation as to what's happening in the weather with all sorts of different parameters. And the nice thing about the SPC mesoanalysis page for someone who's an enthusiast or is trying to learn about the weather is that for each little parameter there's an explanation and places to or some way to go and look up what they actually mean.
Yeah, you just listed quite a bit of information there, and speaking of enormous amounts of data, I think most of us write blogs, so you have quite a few blogs in your history, and I enjoy writing some of those as well. What sort of advice do you have for students and newcomers to document their material, their findings and observations? Is it absolutely necessary? Is it something that they should get into the habit of, or is it should they maybe take some time to read others first and learn ahead of time?
I think that looking at what others do first, I think, is a good idea, and getting a feel for the most effective ways to relate the weather to the public or whatever the audience may be. I think that's a good thing to do, and also, of course, watch the guys on and ladies on television and listen to the radio broadcast. But like I said, you learn about the weather and how to do the weather best by actually doing it. So I do encourage young people to have a blog, do videos or whatever. There's nothing wrong with doing that per se. Just like I say, be careful and don't get yourself in trouble, and also make sure that your audience understands who you are and what your background is and your experience level too.
James, did you have another follow-up you wanted to throw out?
Yeah, Frank, from a broadcasting side of things, and you're a radio guy, I was just wondering if you could give any insight into what your day maybe is like on a regular day, but also during a severe weather outbreak. Like, what does that put on top of your normal work duties?
When there's severe weather going on, normally the added duties involve extra live reports with radio stations. And, on a typical day, when I report to work at AccuWeather, probably sit down and just start looking at what's happening in the weather right now. A lot of folks might be familiar with what's called the funnel forecasting approach, where you start looking at the weather over a wide area and then sort of narrowing down. In our case, the bottom of that funnel, rather than a particular point or Nielsen DMA, might be the entire United States. In my case, where I might be called upon to issue a forecast or do a radio live report with the radio station anywhere. So those things do happen, especially when there's active weather somewhere. But normally, again, looking at what's going on, looking at what the models are showing, if time permits, the ensembles, and oftentimes, since I often starting a schedule around midday, I'm often eating lunch while I'm doing that, because I won't have a chance to do that later. One of the things about working at AccuWeather, it's a fast-paced environment. So you're constantly doing something, and sometimes I tell folks that my schedule is kind of like an ADD thing, where 1 minute I'm looking at the weather in New York City, the next minute Chicago, 5 minutes later Houston, 5 minutes later Omak, Washington. I'm all over the place, and that's part of the importance of your situational awareness and being in touch with what's going on, is that again, you're bouncing around all over the place, and you need to have a general idea of what's going to happen at any given point, and then you can focus on those details for 5 minutes and get out a good product.
That does sound like a little bit of an exciting adventure there, because you got to kind of be ready to go no matter what region they throw at you.
No, that's right, and it can be very challenging.
That's something that Shay and I was talking about before the show started, was kind of playing off of James' question, is how knowledgeable do you have to be? How much research do you put in on maybe those slow weather days to the areas like the Carolinas is the wedge, or out west in the Midwest is the dry line forming? Those different entities that happen in just specific areas. Talk to us a little bit how much research you have to put into that so you can get that accurate forecast out, let's say for Charlotte or Oklahoma City or the marine layer out in San Francisco. Talk to us about a little bit of those entities that are just localized.
That's right, and it will depend upon which point you're looking at as to which details you look at. And since you mentioned California, it's one of those things with so many microclimates out there. You have to spend much more of your time looking at what microclimate will be doing what there. Will the flow be offshore? What's the pressure gradient there? And how thick will the marine layer be? And especially in Southern California, to me, that's a lot of work. I mean, I still think I'm pretty good at it in general, but it's not easy. People think that it's always 72 and sunny in Southern California, and that's not the case at all. But also, looking at the weather in some place in the east, it varies from day to day how much time you might put into any given area. If you have surface high pressure sitting over Columbia, South Carolina, you're probably not going to spend a lot of time looking in detail at what's happening in the Carolinas. You're going to think the models should be in pretty good shape. Hopefully the MOS is doing pretty good. You might look for inversions on the soundings, but that's probably about it. You're probably looking at the developing severe weather situation in the southern plain states and looking at the details there.
Right, Frank. Yeah, we have our Mets team does wind forecasting for the West Coast, and I tell you, it's rather intimidating. So mainly the Southeast and East Coast, but exactly right. North Pacific High, Palo Alto eddies, Catalina eddies. I mean, you name it. There's just so many different microclimate factors going on there. Do you find that area of the country to be the hardest for you, or do you have a favorite around the country? And what kind of meteorology do you like to look at for those areas?
Well, I think the weather back home in the Carolinas is always my favorite, but there's other things that are fun to deal with too. Of course, dealing with severe weather situations in the plains, that's challenging. It's a lot of work. It's stressful. But if you do a good job with it, you feel well rewarded when at the end of it, when you know full well some of the things you've done has probably saved somebody's life. That's really probably the most rewarding part, even more so than your paycheck. When you're in the weather business, is you know that you just did something that saved someone's life, or at least helped them protect their property. But as far as what's the most challenging, everything, a lot of things are challenging. Figuring out when the wedge is going to break in the Carolinas, and for a given point or for several points, if you're forecasting for Charlotte, Raleigh, Columbia, Asheville. Out in West Texas, that can be very challenging too, in figuring out how strong the winds are going to be, whether they'll be blowing dust, whether there'll be severe weather, what character it'll take on. All that's very challenging. I mentioned Omak, Washington a few minutes ago. That place is a challenging place to forecast for, even this time of year. Even if there's high pressure over the top of them, you're trying to figure out whether or not the sun's going to come out, whether the low clouds and fog, oftentimes freezing fog that's stuck in areas east of the Cascades this time of year, will it break? And if it does, well, what impact will that have on your high temperature? If you say the clouds are going to break and you're wrong, you're probably going to bust your high temperature by 5, 8, maybe 10 degrees. So do you have an absolute favorite type of meteorology over an area, like microclimates? Like, say, for instance, mine is sea breezes. I'm all, love to just dive into those. There's a lot to learn there. Do you have anything similar to that? And you said to mention the Southeast, so I'm going to stick to that. Yeah, well, again, it's a little bit of everything with me. One of the things about growing up in the Carolinas, you get exposed to a little bit of everything. The weather in the Carolinas, especially in a place like Charlotte, you can the severe, really threatening weather doesn't seem to happen all that often there, but it can come at you from any direction. It can be a big winter storm. It can be tornadoes. It can be a tropical cyclone. It can be a little bit of everything, and I think perhaps my early experiences with the weather maybe helped me prepare for AccuWeather, because I sort of have my hands in a lot of different cookie jars here at AccuWeather as well, with sometimes tropical forecasting, severe weather forecasting, and so forth. So if I had a favorite, I guess it would probably be dealing with severe thunderstorms, but I don't think that's by a wide margin.
Yeah, that's one thing growing up in the Charlotte area as well. I've always said sort of my biggest my storm was the 2002 ice storm that came through and dropped an inch or two in some places of just straight freezing rain. And I remember like all the trees being folded over and seeing all the flashes from the transformers blowing. But then in summers afterwards, we'll have a random thunderstorm that comes through, and there was one September where we had a tornado warning, and we had to stay after school for about 45 minutes. So just seeing both extremes, and then intermittent, all of that with sunny days and just like perfect weather. I know what you're talking about. It's tough to decide what your favorite weather is.
Yeah, absolutely, because you get a little bit of everything if you live in a place like Charlotte. Do you enjoy doing the tropics as well? Is that an area that you cover? Yeah, I actually do. I do a fair amount of tropical forecasting here. We actually have a couple of TV stations down there in the Caribbean, and I usually cover the tropics when I do my blog, at least during the season. And unfortunately for me, back in January too, when we had Alex form, so I spend a little bit of time on my blog on that as well.
Frank, is there anything you did from a broadcasting standpoint to get to where you are today? Did you practice anything? Did you do anything to kind of strengthen those public speaking skills you were talking about earlier? Absolutely, and actually when I started at AccuWeather, my public speaking skills probably were not particularly good. I had a decent voice. Thankfully, my southern accent was not terribly thick, and much to the chagrin of my parents, it's kind of faded in the 15 years I've been at AccuWeather. It typically comes back within a week of visiting down there, though. But anyway, it actually did take a good bit of practice to get good at being able to deliver radio broadcasts and having a good resonant voice that radio stations appreciate. So it takes some work, and it took a lot of work outside of just what I would do at AccuWeather.
Well, Frank, one thing I kind of going back to the schooling thing, talk to our folks who are watching. How should a meteorologist, a guy or a girl wanting to go into meteorology, how should they choose their school? Several schools, UNC Charlotte, NC State, UNC Asheville, Virginia Tech, just to name a few, University of Georgia, they all have programs. Talk to us how we should, or how you would recommend folks to kind of find the school of their choice.
Well, all of those schools that you mentioned, and I think pretty much every weather school I've ever visited, and a lot of the ones I've heard of, also they're all going to give you a good education in the meteorology. What you need to be thinking about is what else you might want to do that's kind of related to the meteorology. One of the things we talk about in our talks, and some of y'all may have heard this already, is that the days of just going to school, getting a meteorology degree, learning how to be a weather forecaster, and getting a job, they're pretty much over. You need to have something else to bring to the table nowadays, be it computer programming, GIS, various specialties within the field, public speaking skills, good television talent and skill with that, great communication skills. You need to bring something else to the table with you if you want to find a job in the field anymore. So I think that's what you want to do is to go find, in addition to your meteorology degree that you're going to get and would probably be happy with from any of those schools, but also find out what else you can do well there. Like, for example, if you're interested in GIS and how that might relate to meteorology, University of Georgia and Virginia Tech are pretty good schools for that from what I've seen. If you want to be a TV broadcaster, Penn State seems to be a pretty good choice there. So, and probably NC State too. So, again, go visit the schools, go find out what they do, and find out what, in addition to meteorology, you can learn there.
I guess it would help if I unmute my microphone. And I'm going to kind of toss this to James just a little bit because he's been in the studio. And Frank, please speak on this as well. You're talking about having a degree or focusing on something, just not only meteorology but something else. A lot of forecasters, a lot of meteorologists now are maybe weekend meteorologists, but throughout the week they're doing journalism work. They're going covering different stories throughout the audience, the DMA. So talk to us a little bit, James, if you can maybe hit on that a little bit on how they're more of a multimedia journalist slash meteorologist at many news stations.
I think a lot of people in local broadcasting now, and I think Frank will probably attest to this, you got to do a little bit of everything. Frank's a radio guy, but he's also blogging. People in TV are going to be doing social media. The weekend meteorologist may also be making visits to schools and outreach with the community. So there is kind of a vast range of things that somebody might be doing, or even like you alluded to, they might be out doing other types of science-related reporting, because a lot of times, and I think we touched upon this on the earthquake show, a lot of that stuff gets thrown towards the weather people, the kind of the broad scope of science, because they tend to be the coolest and smartest people in the newsroom. So,
at least when it comes to science, that's one of the things that is becoming increasingly true today, is that if you're a TV meteorologist, you're not just the meteorologist, you're the station scientist.
Yes, yeah, that does seem to be the case, which poses, I guess, some interesting conundrums, because you kind of have to be an expert in a lot of things. Have you found that, Frank, where maybe you got thrown a curveball that isn't necessarily textbook what's in the job description, but as things kind of expand to get more diverse, kind of came under your umbrella?
Oh yeah, those same things that happen to TV meteorologists have happened to me a couple of times too. Like, for example, I was on doing a live report with a station in Springfield, Missouri. There had been that earthquake up in Michigan earlier that day, and they asked me about it. They asked me a bunch of geology kind of questions, and I'm like, well, I don't know if I'm really qualified to answer this, but I'll do the best I can. and half the interview was talking about geology and about the earthquake.
Live broadcast, you never know what they're going to throw to you, because we're always the people ad-libbing, so it's always kind of like they just throw stuff at you and see what sticks.
Yeah, and it's actually the same day that it came up in Chicago as well. I was serving our station in Chicago, WBBM, that day, and I found out, it was probably 10 or 12 minutes after the earthquake happened that, hey, just on the other side of Lake Michigan, there was an earthquake. And I told them about it, and they hadn't heard yet, but literally 2 minutes after I told them about it, they started getting calls saying, hey, we felt some shaking. You folks at the radio station know what's happening?
Yeah, that happened here. That happened here yesterday in Charleston, where some jets
with the sonic boom thing. Yeah.
Right, and so instantly my phone's blowing up. I'm getting emails and everything from all angles of social media from the outreaches that I do for weather flow, and I'm like, wow, okay. First thing I got to do is look at radar. Okay, there's a signature for chaff from jets, most likely. So I kind of threw that out there as a possibility, but we're waiting to hear back from the seismologist and the Weather Service again. Like you said, don't try to own something, be the authority about it. But yeah, you're always forced with, here comes something else from a different science textbook, and then you got to look at the atmosphere and the inversion, what's going on, and sound ducting and all these other components to it. So never a dull day sometimes when these things get thrown at you from left field.
That's right, and that's how what you expect to be a quiet day might turn out to be not such a quiet day when something weird happens, and you suddenly have to be the expert on something you're not really an expert on.
Yeah, it was very quiet. very slight onshore flow. Waters were dead calm. It was like, okay, it's gonna be a nice day, and all of a sudden, out of nowhere.
Mm-hmm. Boom! People's windows are shaking.
I was thinking about
what caused it.
Frank, earlier you said you eat lunch while you begin your forecasting, and I think that's probably the #1 rule in broadcasting is eat when you can, because you never know what's going to happen later.
Yep, that's right. Always take your time for when to eat or go to the bathroom or whatever when you have the chance, because 10 minutes from now you may not have that chance. Something crazy might happen that you have to deal with.
Well, Frank, you're talking about radio, and you're doing Chicago and out in Washington State. How does that get processed to you? Do you have a different area each day, or they just kind of give you a list and say these are the cities you're covering today, or how does that go about?
Well, yeah, here at AccuWeather, it's kind of like that, where they sort of say, okay, here's a list of duties for you today. It's predictable, so it's like if I know that I'm doing a certain schedule on a certain day, I know what to expect in advance. And oftentimes, actually, even before I show up at AccuWeather, I'll start, kind of looking at the weather that morning before I go work out or walk the dog or whatever. I'll take a look at the satellite pictures. I'll take a look at the radar or whatever. And that's actually something that's kind of important, I think, to get into the habit of doing if you want to be an operational meteorologist or TV guy. Whatever. It's kind of important to kind of look at the weather every now and then. Unfortunately, even if you're on vacation, spend a few minutes every day just looking to see what's happened. That way, you're not totally flat-footed when you walk in the door, either later that day for your shift or when you get back from vacation.
All right, well, I'm going to kind of transition. I'm surfing on Twitter here looking for questions, and I came across Jason Pavic. I hope I'm saying that last name right. He's works there at AccuWeather, and he's showing a graphic of the severe weather potential next week. Care to maybe go into that a little bit? Yeah,
that's going to be an interesting situation next week. I mentioned that on my blog last night, that we're going to have really ahead of this storm that we'll be dealing with next week, we get a nice stretch of mild weather, which sort of defines the character of the storm. It'll have a good warm sector out ahead of it, and since there'll be a good warm sector, there's going to be a threat for severe weather. And it's looking as though that we'll have to deal with at least 1 or 2 days of potential tornadoes next week. Timing and exact location are still uncertain at this range, but it looks like the southern plains into the Arklatex and maybe Mississippi Valley have the potential to have to deal with that next week.
And Shay, you can help me with this because I know I tweeted it out this morning, but I can't remember what the stat was. But the SPC's already put out is it a day 6, day 5?
State 7, I think. SPC had a 15% area out for severe weather.
Yeah, I'll have to go and have to check that out. I'll get back to you in a second here.
I couldn't remember. I know I retweeted it early this morning, and all kinds of things happened earlier today, so I can't remember if it was a day 6 or 7, but That's a pretty high percentage for this far out. So
Right.
something definitely to be watched down in the south.
Yeah, it's a day 7 thing. It's for the 2nd, which is Tuesday.
Yeah, Groundhog's Day. So
Yeah, it's Groundhog's Day.
I don't know if there's been a severe weather outbreak on Groundhog's Day or not, but
Mm-hmm.
that'd be interesting. So
Yeah.
let's kind of. I know we're coming up on the 9 o'clock hour, and I know you probably are wanting to finish up at work or get home. So we'll kind of start closing out the interview, but maybe recap a little bit about what you guys saw at AccuWeather from this past winter storm, maybe for the southeast, and then kind of parlay into what you think February has to offer us here in the southeast.
Okay. Well, the winter storm, I think we did a pretty good job with it overall. The issue with the storm, as always, is the exact track, and what got a lot of folks here is that there was such a gradient in the snow from, like I said, just from here to in State College to Huntington, there's a difference of 11 inches, or more than that. They had almost 2 feet there in Huntington, Pennsylvania, which is, like I said, only about 20 miles south, but there's about 7 here. The storm ended up going a little further north than a lot of folks thought, so that resulted in more snow a little further north than AccuWeather thought. A lot of other folks thought too. So, that's what we were dealing with there. I think we did a decent job farther south. We were saying days in advance there'd be blizzard conditions and a lot of snow. And in D.C., that worked out just fine. Northern Virginia did end up being kind of ground zero for this storm, I think, at least for the snow accumulations there, over to southeastern Pennsylvania and in the parts of New Jersey, too. Going further south, I think we did a pretty good job across the Carolinas. We called for, I think, more snow than ice. That seemed to work out pretty good. Had a lot of snow in the mountains. I think we ended up getting a little more than what we were calling for in Asheville. Since they had 13 and a half, I think we were calling for about a foot. So but that's not really a huge difference. But I think we caught the flavor of the storm pretty good, and I think we also handled the threat for the high winds and coastal flooding and beach erosion along the Mid-Atlantic coastline pretty well too. Now, what's going forward here? Well, like I just mentioned, the next few days it looks like after one more chilly shot coming in, we get a mild spell, but won't last long. Everyone, when they get a few mild days in a row, you hear a lot of people saying winter's over, but winter's not over. After this big storm that we have to deal with next week, it looks like it gets cold again. It actually could get pretty cold. And February, the rest of February to me looks like this will be kind of back and forth. We probably get cold shots, but we probably see some mild air coming north too. It looks like it could be a very entertaining weather pattern because of that. Clashes of air masses resulting in decent storms to deal with.
Right, yeah. Seeing the WPC, that was exactly right. That was on day 7. I'm going to share the screen here. There it is on day 7. So I don't know if you can see that or not, but it's pretty wide, a pretty large area, and exactly what you said, Mississippi Valley all the way up to Tennessee Valley, just windward side of the mountains. So,
Frank, I have one question about AccuWeather, and Joey Mosseller, it's his birthday, so he's not able to join us tonight. He always asks the hard-hitting questions. So
Okay.
the question that he was kind of bringing forward was, it's very hard to predict weather, anywhere between 5 days out. It's kind of hard to predict what's going to happen, especially in the wintertime. I know AccuWeather does a 30-day forecast. Kind of talk to us a little bit about how that forecast, where you get that information from day 5 to 30. How do you formulate that forecast?
Okay, well, we look at a lot of different things, not just the operational models and the ensembles, but we're also looking at the longer range stuff, the CFS. We look at the Euro long range products, extended range stuff that they have. And the thing I'd like to stress most of all is don't go thinking that this is all an automated thing, that we're just regurgitating model data, because we're not doing that. People aren't actually looking at that. Even out to day 45, I think that gets looked at least once per day. So again, it's not just something that's automated, and a lot of people give some criticism about the long range forecast out to 30 days and beyond at AccuWeather, but we took AccuWeather back in the day when we expanded to 5 days, into 7 days. We took a lot of criticism, and now this day and age, a 7-day forecast isn't thought of as such a terrible thing anymore. So I guess that's kind of the way I see it, is that if you one of these days, I think the science probably is going to be such that you can come up with an exact, precise forecast for day 45 or 60 or whatever, and we need to start trying. And here at AccuWeather, we were the first to make the attempts at the 5- and 7-day forecast, and we had some success. And now we're working on the longer range stuff too. And if you don't try, you certainly will never win.
So Frank, that kind of leads me to a question for you as well, as far as your data and your spot forecasting for individual cities. Are you pulling information from the local National Weather Service Mesonet or the NDVC, or do you have any other private mesonets that you work with to gain more information and data for spot forecasts around the country?
We pull a lot of that data in, yes. It's mostly, I think, from the MEDA system that we get those things in which we use to work on our forecast for each of these little points. But a lot of that is also coming from other forecast sources, the MOS, as well as like the gridded MOS, which of course is looked at by myself and a lot of the folks sitting behind me here. AccuWeather's forecast is looked at continuously. It's continuously updated, and so we're always trying to get the best forecast out. We don't just fire in forget our forecasts here.
All right, guys. Well, we're closing on the 9 o'clock hour, so I know Kit has the final question that Joey normally asks, so I'm going to ask this one before Kit. Kind of a fun question. Frank is a big Carolina Panthers fan, and Frank, tell us, what is your forecast for the Super Bowl? How does the Carolina Panthers win the Super Bowl in San Francisco or Santa Clara?
Well, I think that the Panthers are going to win. The question is whether it's going to be a big win. I don't think it's going to be a blowout like it was against the Cardinals. The Broncos are no slouch. I'm not going to beat my chest and say we're going to blow them away because I don't think that's going to happen. I think there's several different little keys here, and I think what happens in the trenches along the line is probably what's going to decide it. How well Carolina's offensive line protects Cam Newton, and how well Denver can protect Peyton Manning. I think the quarterback that makes the most mistakes probably ends up being on the losing side.
I agree. If we can pressure Manning and our O-line can help Cam out, I think we'll be on the victory side. And Tim Buckley, I think you may know Tim. He told me, he said make sure you ask Frank what he thinks the Panthers are going to do. So I wanted to get that in for Tim. So Kit, I'll pass it along to you, and we'll kind of close things out here.
Well, thanks, Scotty. Well, Frank, our last question, we've already sort of gone over it a little bit, but basically we have a lot of students in middle and high school and teachers of those students who will watch our show, if not live, later on. So what would be like the #1 piece of advice that you would give one of these students who's aspiring to go into meteorology at some point in their life? So like, what should they do to continue this pursuit of their career?
Don't be ashamed of your passion. A lot of people will look at you and your fascination in the weather and some of the things you do because you're fascinated in the weather, and they'll think you're crazy. Don't be deterred by that. I often say that I think every meteorologist seems to have a little bit of crazy in them, and it's certainly the way it seems to the outside world, but the truth of the matter is it's not that you're crazy, you're just passionate about the weather, and don't let anything get in the way of that.
It's very sound advice.
And that's really true
Yeah.
for any field. If what you want to do is install spark plugs for a living and you're passionate about it, then go do that and don't be ashamed of it and be the best you can at
And I will admit there are many crazies here at the department at UNC Charlotte.
it. There's a few everywhere, I think.
I feel better already after you saying that.
Hmm.
Well, Frank, we appreciate you coming on tonight, and hopefully we can have you back on. Maybe we can once we get into tropical season. I know you're big into the tropics. You and Shay can walk us through what it looks to be in the tropical department later on this spring and into the summer.
Okay, sure. And it looks like that's going to be a busier season this year than last. Thanks to the El Nino, it wasn't all that active in the Atlantic, but it looks like the El Nino is going away and might even be replaced by La Nina before we get to the end of the hurricane season, which usually results in more favorable conditions down there in the tropical Atlantic. So there may be a lot more to talk about this year.
Yeah, some indications for that absolutely by August or September, I think, is when some of those values go below.
Right.
It has certainly been a quiet tropical season the past couple of years, so that'll be good to discuss. So hopefully we can get that. And I do want to give you the opportunity to promote your Twitter handle and Facebook if you want to do that for our followers who are watching tonight.
That's right. I'm at AccuFrank on Twitter. Anytime you want to say hi or tell me what you're seeing, where you are, or during a storm, or want to send me pictures, always happy to get that kind of stuff. If you have questions about AccuWeather, maybe you're interested in coming to AccuWeather, if you're interested in applying for a job or something up here, just send me a DM. I'll get you to the right place.
All right, Frank, and keep pounding. Remember, we gotta
That's
keep
right.
pounding.
Keep pounding.
Keep
Pounding.
I was going to ask you, how hard is it to be a Panthers fan up in, I would presume, Steelers or Eagles country up there?
Well, it goes in cycles. Back the last time the Panthers were really good, back in 2003, it could be a little more contentious back then. Then we went through the cycle where the Steelers were really good and the Eagles were pretty good, and they sort of took pity on the struggling Panthers and our fans. But now things seem to be heating up a little bit once again, although really, in general, it seems that the fans around here, the Eagles, Steelers, Ravens fans, they seem to have respect for the Panthers, and I think I understand why that is because it's not just the fact that they've gotten good and really good again, but also there's also the character of the team and the players. There's a lot of good guys.
Now, don't forget about your Gamecocks.
Absolutely
Your
not.
College football.
Yeah, rough season for Gamecock football last year, but I have a lot of faith in Muschamp, especially the way he's been working his tail off on the recruiting trail. I think that's important, and not to try to take too much away from the hated folks up in the upstate there, but part of the reason I think they're been so good is because Gamecock recruiting hasn't quite been what it should have been the last 2 or 3 years, but that's changing. It changed immediately the minute Muschamp got hired. He hit the recruiting trail and he's hitting it hard.
As James and I can talk, James is a Bulldog and I'm a Gator fan. He's good. You're going to have a great defense, but offensively, I don't know. Muschamp's going to have to work on that. He didn't do such a good job in Florida, so
yeah, that was his struggle. Hopefully he learned from that and has the right people in the right place.
I hope so. The old ball coach. It's still going to be hard not seeing Spurrier on the sideline at South Carolina. So.
Yeah, that's different. I mean, you're still going to see his face every now and then. He's sort of doing some behind-the-scenes stuff, I think, still. But so you'll still hear from him every now and then. But Muschamp's got the reins now for sure.
All right. Well, Frank, we appreciate you joining us tonight, and like I said, hopefully we can get you back on when the tropics start to fire up, and we can talk a little tropical meteorology with you. So.
All right, sounds
You
good.
coming on. And next week, before we sign off, next week, a great show, ChaserCon, just wrapped up in the Oklahoma City area, and we're going to have on Gary England, who is a chief meteorologist out at News 9 in Oklahoma City, since retired, but still a popular figure in the weather world. And he's going to be joining us along with Rick Smith, who is the warning coordinator meteorologist out at the National Weather Service in Norman, Oklahoma. Rick's been on our show several times, and so has Gary. So they're going to kind of come on and talk to us about what happened at ChaserCon, and we're going to talk about the relationship between the National Weather Service, the TV side, and Chasers altogether, and how that relationship works as we looks like we're going to enter I guess severe weather season probably in the next 4 to 6 weeks as we're in January here. It should start to pop up around mid to late March. So we're looking forward to having those guys on next week with us. So we hope that you will tune in. And actually, after that, Mike Smith will be joining us on the 10th. And Mike used to work there at AccuWeather. So we'll have him on as well. So, Frank, once again, thanks for joining us tonight, and we appreciate all of you for watching us tonight, and we hope you have a good week, and we'll see you next week.
Sure. Well, take care.